Even today, the people of a small town in Illinois shiver when they remember that night. It was 1973. A hot, heavy, suffocating night, and then, from the darkness, came a sound that no human could make. At first, everyone thought it must have been an animal. But when Henry McDaniel opened his front door, what he saw was neither fully human nor completely animal. A creature barely 4 feet tall, with glowing red eyes, stepped out of the thick shadows and began moving toward him. From that moment on, the nights in Enfield would never know peace again. It was the spring of 1973 in the quiet town of Enfield, Illinois, the kind of place that seemed frozen in time. The streets were narrow and lonely, the houses modest, their wooden frames creaking with every gust of wind. Life moved slowly here. People worked, went to church, waved politely at neighbors. It wasn't the kind of place you expected anything unusual to happen. But that calm was about to be shattered by something none of them could have prepared for. Henry McDaniel lived in a small, weathered house at the edge of town, surrounded by patches of thick woods and open fields. His days were simple. It wasn't the kind of man prone to wild imagination or tall tales. If anything, Henry was practical to the point of being dull. But on the night of April 25th, something would come scratching at his door. Something that would leave him shaken for the rest of his life. That evening, Henry sat in his living room with his wife, the old radio humming softly in the background. The children had already gone to bed, and outside, a storm had rolled across the town. The rain had come in short bursts, drumming against the thin roof, but by the time darkness settled, it was only the wind that rattled the windows. Henry was half asleep in his chair when he heard a faint, unnatural sound coming from outside. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the creak of the house settling. It was something else. He leaned forward, frowning, his ears straining against the silence that followed, and then it came again, scratching. Sharp, deliberate claws raking against the mesh of his front door screen. Henry's heart thudded as he shot up from his chair, his wife asking him what it was. He didn't answer. He grabbed the flashlight he kept by the door and stepped cautiously into the hallway. The sound came again, louder this time, and the children stirred in their beds. Henry clicked on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark as he approached the front door. The scratching stopped. For a moment, everything was silent, the only sound his own shallow breathing. And then he pulled the curtain back from the window beside the door. What he saw in that instant froze his blood. There, crouched on his porch, was something he had never seen before. At first glance, it seemed animal-like, but the longer he looked, the less sense it made. It had 3 legs, arranged in a way no earthly creature should have been able to balance. Its body was short, almost stubby, but the way it moved suggested an unnatural agility. 2 short arms twitched at its sides, as if restless, and its head turned slowly toward the light. That's when Henry saw its eyes, 2 pink orbs glowing in the beam of his flashlight, as big and bright as flashlights themselves. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The creature's skin seemed to shimmer between gray and pale green, rough like leather, but wet from the rain. Its mouth thick, that was even what it was, stretched in a jagged line across its face, quivering as if it was trying to decide whether to snarl or speak. The thing let out a sound that didn't belong to any animal Henry had ever known. It was high-pitched, shrill, and layered, like multiple voices screaming at once from inside a single throat. Henry staggered back, his hand fumbling at the doorknob. His wife shouted his name, the children now fully awake and crying. The creature lurched toward the door, its claws dragging down the metal screen with a harsh, ear-splitting screech. Henry slammed the door shut and locked it, his heart hammering. He could hear the thing moving outside, circling the house, its uneven 3-legged gait thumping against the porch. In that moment, Henry did something that shocked even himself. He ran to the bedroom, yanked open the closet, and pulled out his revolver. By the time he returned to the front door, the sound had moved away toward the yard. He threw the door open and stepped outside, the flashlight beam cutting across the dark grass. The night was silent again, but he knew it was out there. He raised the revolver with shaking hands. The beam caught movement near the edge of the yard, where the shadows of the trees pressed in close. And there it was, the creature, standing half-crouched, its glowing pink eyes staring back at him. For a moment, Henry swore it was studying him, like it understood what a gun was, like it was daring him to shoot. And then, in a flash, it darted away, faster than anything with such awkward limbs had a right to move. It vanished into the dark woods, leaving behind only silence. Henry stood there for several long seconds, his breath fogging in the cold night air. His wife's voice broke the trance, calling for him to come back inside. He lowered the gun and stepped back into the house, bolting the door shut once more. But even as he tried to convince himself it was gone, a part of him knew the nightmare was only just beginning. The next morning, when the sun rose weakly over the damp fields, Henry gathered the courage to step outside. He half expected to find nothing, to wake up and realize the whole thing had been a bad dream, but the evidence was there. The front door screen was shredded with deep claw marks, the metal bent outward. And in the soft earth of the yard, pressed into the mud, were prints. At first they looked like the tracks of a dog, but the longer he studied them, the stranger they became. Each one had 6 distinct toes, arranged in a way that made no natural sense. Henry crouched over them, running a hand across the impressions, his stomach turning. These weren't the tracks of any animal that belonged in Illinois or anywhere else on Earth. He told his wife not to speak of it to the neighbors, but in a town like Enfield, word spread fast. By afternoon, people were already whispering about Henry McDaniel's monster. Some laughed, calling it a drunken tale. Others frowned, remembering odd noises in the night they had dismissed as nothing. Children huddled together in the schoolyard, daring each other to walk past the McDaniel house after dark. The local paper caught wind of it, and soon reporters were knocking on Henry's door. At first, he resisted. He didn't want to be the man everyone called crazy, but the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. He knew what he saw. He knew what clawed his door, what left those prints in the mud. So when a reporter from the MT, Vernon Register News, asked him to tell his story, Henry did. His words spread across Illinois, sparking headlines that turned Enfield from a sleepy farm town into the center of a terrifying mystery. Henry described the creature in detail. It had 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms, 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. His voice shook as he spoke, but his conviction never wavered. He told the reporter about the scratches on the door, the 6-toed footprints, the sound it made. And then, almost as an afterthought, he added something that chilled everyone who read it. If they do find it, they will find more than one. And they won't be from this planet, I can tell you that. Those words spread like wildfire. Suddenly, people weren't just whispering about a strange animal or a prank. They were talking about something alien, something not of this world. Theories swirled, an escaped laboratory experiment, a cryptid lurking in the woods, or visitors from beyond the stars. But none of those theories could quiet the growing unease in Enfield. That night, Henry tried to sleep, but every sound outside made him flinch. He swore he heard it again, moving around the house, brushing against the siding. Once he thought he saw those glowing pink eyes peering in from the window, but when he rushed to look, there was nothing there. The fear became a weight on his chest, pressing down with every passing hour, and still he knew in his bones it wasn't over. The people of Enfield began locking their doors earlier, pulling their curtains tight against the night. Farmers kept their livestock closer to the barns. Children were warned not to wander after dark. And as the gossip grew, so did the paranoia. Because if Henry was telling the truth and deep down many suspected he was, then something had come to Enfield. Something that wasn't leaving anytime soon. The morning after Henry McDaniel's terrifying encounter, Enfield felt different. The sun rose, but it didn't bring the warmth or comfort it usually did. Instead, there was an odd heaviness in the air, a weight that seemed to press down on the little town. People carried on with their routines, going to work, tending to their yards, visiting the diner, but their conversations had changed. Whispers about the thing on Henry's porch spread like wildfire. At first, most laughed it off. "Henry's been hitting the bottle," some muttered. Others said he was just trying to stir up attention. But laughter only covered fear, and that fear began to gnaw at them when the first neighbors came forward with their own strange experiences. A boy named Greg, no more than 12, swore he had seen something crouched by the edge of his family's cornfield late that night. He described it in broken, nervous words: short body, strange legs, glowing eyes. His father dismissed it as a raccoon, but Greg wouldn't sleep in his room for 3 nights straight. Then came the Simmons family, who lived less than a mile from Henry. They told a deputy that their dog wouldn't stop barking at the tree line, hackles raised, eyes locked on the woods. The next morning, the Simmonses found long scratches carved into the side of their shed. Too high off the ground for any ordinary animal, these weren't isolated incidents. Within days, more people began reporting odd disturbances, scratches on windows, thumps against barns, fleeting shapes darting across lonely roads, and the most chilling of all, the feeling of being watched. The police could no longer ignore it. At first, they treated Henry's story as nonsense, but the sheer number of reports forced them to pay attention. Deputies began making late-night patrols around the town's outer roads, their headlights cutting across fields and woods. More often than not, they returned with nothing, but sometimes they came back pale and shaken. Deputy Mike Davis was one of them. One night, while driving his cruiser near the abandoned railway tracks, he swore he saw movement ahead. He slowed the car, his hand reaching for the spotlight. In the beam, for just a second, he saw something scramble across the road. It didn't run like a dog, and it didn't leap like a deer. It moved awkwardly, lopsided, as if 3 legs carried its weight. Pink eyes glowed briefly in the light before it vanished into the brush. By the time he stepped out, gun drawn, the woods were silent. But Davis couldn't shake the image. He told no one officially, only muttering to his partner later, Henry wasn't lying. The media descended quickly. Word of the Enfield Monster had already been picked up by the MT, Vernon Register News, and now other outlets were circling. Reporters showed up with notebooks, cameras, and that curious hunger for the bizarre. They interviewed Henry again and again, capturing his stern insistence that what he saw was real. They printed his description word for word: 3 legs, short body, 2 little short arms, and pink eyes as big as flashlights. Some journalists treated it as comedy, filling their columns with sarcastic remarks about aliens in the cornfields. But others couldn't ignore the fear in Henry's eyes. He was in T, a man chasing fame. He was a man who looked like he had Dan T slept since that night. His hands trembled when he spoke. His voice cracked when he recalled the scratching at his door. The attention only deepened the paranoia in town. Now strangers were driving through Enfield, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature. Cars parked along rural roads at night. Headlights turned off, passengers sitting in silence with cameras ready. They wanted proof. What they got instead were moments of terror they couldn't explain. A pair of college students from out of town claimed they had camped in the woods near the McDaniel property. In the dead of night, they heard what they thought were footsteps circling their tent. The sound was uneven, dragging like something with a limp or an extra leg. When one of them dared unzip the flap, they saw nothing. But in the morning, they found 6-toed tracks pressed into the dirt, circling them like a predator had studied them all night long. Small disturbances escalated into terrifying encounters. People spoke of hearing voices that didn't belong to any human. Strange, layered shrieks drifting across the fields after midnight. Some swore the voices weren't outside at all. But inside their homes, whispers crawling across the walls, vanishing when they snapped on the lights. Barn doors were found wide open with animals missing, though no blood or tracks gave away what had happened. Chickens disappeared without a trace. A farmer's goat was found trembling, eyes wide, as if it had looked into the face of something it couldn't understand. Henry himself wasn't spared further torment. 2 nights after his first sighting, the scratching returned. This time, he didn't wait. He fired through the screen door with his revolver, the shots echoing through the dark. Neighbors heard it and called the police, who found Henry shaken but alive. When deputies inspected the scene, they found more 6-toed tracks leading away into the wet grass. The creature had fled again, but the message was clear: it wasn't done with Henry. The local authorities grew frustrated. Some wanted to dismiss it all as hysteria, but others were unsettled by the physical evidence they couldn't deny. Claw marks, tracks, livestock disturbances. One deputy remarked privately that if this was a prank, someone had gone to terrifying lengths to pull it off. But what kind of prankster moved faster than headlights and left tracks no human could fake? Meanwhile, Enfield's residents began locking themselves inside earlier than ever. Windows were nailed shut, curtains were pinned tight. Fathers sat awake with shotguns across their laps, staring at the door until dawn. Mothers hushed their children when they whispered about glowing pink eyes in the dark. The town's nights were no longer silent. They were filled with the restless shifting of people too afraid to sleep. The monster became both a joke and a nightmare. Some kids taunted each other, daring one another to go near Henry's porch. But beneath the laughter, their voices trembled. Adults scoffed publicly, then double-checked their locks in private. The fear wasn't just about the creature itself, it was about the unknown. Whatever it was, it didn't belong, and it was prowling just beyond their doors. More sightings poured in. A truck driver reported nearly hitting something on a rural road, swearing it wasn't a deer. It had eyes glowing red-pink in his headlights, and it leapt out of the way with unnatural speed. A woman claimed she saw a figure crouched in her garden at dusk, watching her from the shadows until she screamed and it bolted into the fields. Each story was different in detail, but the essence remained the same. Glowing eyes, strange limbs, an unnatural presence. The media frenzy reached a fever pitch when Henry's words were published again. If they do find it, they will find more than one. They won't be from this planet. Suddenly, the Enfield Monster wasn't just a local oddity, it was being connected to UFO sightings, alien encounters, and all the mysteries of the unknown. People speculated it was extraterrestrial, something that had wandered too far from a ship. Others argued it was a cryptid, a hidden species lurking in the backwoods. Still others whispered it was something darker, something not bound by flesh at all. The strangest part was that no one could predict where it would strike next. Some nights were quiet, others brought screams in the distance. Phone calls to the sheriff's office, frantic reports of glowing eyes in backyards. The randomness made it worse. Like a storm that could break at any moment. And then came the night when several neighbors claimed to see it together. It was near the edge of town, where the streetlights faded into fields. A group of teenagers swore they saw the creature standing at the tree line, perfectly still, its eyes glowing like two burning coals. It didn't move when they shouted. It only tilted its head, as though studying them.
Ow.
Then, with a single lurch, it disappeared back into the dark. That sighting spread faster than any other, because it wasn't just one person, it was many. The paranoia tipped into hysteria. People called the sheriff's office demanding protection. Some even packed up and left town, claiming they wouldn't return until the thing was gone. Through it all, Henry remained at the center, became both a pariah and a prophet, mocked by some, respected by others. But when he walked down Main Street, heads turned. People whispered, because everyone knew. He was the first to see it, and somehow the creature kept coming back to him. The small-town charm of Enfield was gone. Doors slammed shut faster. Strangers drove slowly, with windows rolled down, hoping for a glimpse but praying they wouldn't find it. The nights stretched long, filled with noises no one could explain. And somewhere in the fields and woods, the monster lingered, watching, waiting, reminding them that Enfield was no longer safe. The escalation had begun, and there was no turning back. By the third week of April 1973, Enfield was no longer the quiet little town it had been for decades. Panic had crept into every household like a sickness. People who once trusted their sleepy streets and fields now looked over their shoulders at every sound. The smallest noise in the dark was enough to send chills racing down spines. The town had become a community under siege. It began with the children. They were the first to show the toll of fear in their pale faces and sleepless eyes. Bedtime became a battlefield, kids crying, refusing to sleep unless the light stayed on. Some clutching baseball bats or kitchen knives under their pillows. Parents tried soothing them with gentle words, telling them monsters weren't real. But their voices wavered, because deep down, they didn't believe it themselves. Not anymore. School teachers noticed it too. The once bubbly classrooms grew hushed. Kids whispered about glowing eyes in the cornfields, about something scratching on windows while they tried to sleep. One little girl, barely 9 years old, broke into sobs when her teacher accidentally switched off the classroom lights during a film reel. She screamed, "It's here! It's here!" before collapsing into trembling silence. The teacher comforted her, but when she glanced out the window, she couldn't shake the thought that maybe the girl wasn't just imagining things. The adults weren't immune either. Fathers sat guard at night, their rifles laid across their laps, ears tuned for every creak, every whisper of wind. Mothers kept their children close, sometimes all sleeping in the same room, because the thought of separation was unbearable. The idea that something could be prowling outside something unnatural was enough to fracture the peace of every family. The town's livestock became the next victims. Chickens vanished from locked coops, without leaving a single feather behind. Farmers woke to find pig pens empty, gates untouched, no tracks leading away. Still, cows and goats were found trembling, eyes wide with terror, as if they had been hunted by something they couldn't comprehend. Some refused to eat for days, their bodies weakening as fear hollowed them out. One farmer, Harold Jenkins, swore he heard the most blood-curdling screams coming from his barn one night. By the time he got there with his lantern, nothing remained except a strange stench that lingered in the air, sharp, metallic, and unnatural. His best dairy cow was gone, simply gone, as though it had been lifted straight into the night. Word of these disappearances spread quickly, and fear multiplied. People began whispering about connections between the strange creature and the livestock. Some believed it was feeding, others thought it was hunting for sport. A few muttered that Henry McDaniel had been right all along. If there was one, there might be more. The woods, once a place for hunting and fishing, became a territory no one dared to enter. By day, the trees stood still and silent, yet every shadow seemed deeper, every rustle charged with menace. By night, the woods came alive with sounds people couldn't explain, screeches, growls, and eerie whistles that echoed across fields. Men who knew every sound of the forest suddenly admitted they had no idea what was out there anymore. The panic wasn't just in the minds of the townsfolk. Physical evidence piled up, haunting and undeniable. Claw marks gouged into barn doors deep enough to splinter wood. Windows bore scratches as though something had tried to claw its way inside. Tracks appeared in the mud, those strange six-toed prints, sometimes leading in circles, sometimes vanishing mid-stride as if the creature had leaped into the air. Deputies cast plaster molds of them, but the shapes baffled every expert. They looked canine in some ways, reptilian in others, and utterly alien in their entirety. Henry McDaniel, still the center of attention, became both respected and shunned. People came to him for answers, hoping he could explain what they were dealing with, but his presence also reminded them of their terror. His porch, once an ordinary slab of wood and nails, had become the epicenter of Enfield's nightmare. Henry stopped sleeping altogether. Every creak of the house jolted him awake, gun in hand. Sat in his living room through long nights, his family huddled close, praying for dawn. He knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the creature wasn't finished with him. Neighbors gathered more often, clinging to each other for comfort. On warm nights, men sat in circles with shotguns, flashlights, and beer, pretending they weren't afraid. They joked loudly, cursed the creature, and swore they'd shoot it on sight. But when the night grew too quiet, when the field stretched endlessly into black, their bravado crumbled. Jaws tightened, hands gripped their guns tighter, and eyes darted at every flicker of movement in the distance. Some families went so far as to abandon their homes entirely. A handful packed up in the middle of the night and fled to relatives in neighboring towns. Leaving doors locked and windows shuttered. "We'll come back when it's over," they said, though no one knew what over really meant. The sheriff's department found itself stretched thin. It patrolled nightly, searching with spotlights and dogs, but the creature always slipped through. Reports kept coming, one after another. Eyes seen glowing from tree lines, shapes crossing lonely roads, livestock missing, scratches appearing overnight. The sheriff began keeping a thick folder on his desk, every report filed neatly. Though he had no answers to give, the official line remained. "We're investigating." But in hushed conversations, deputies admitted they were terrified. And then there were the screams. People across Enfield began reporting the same sound at night long, piercing wails unlike anything they had ever heard. They weren't coyote calls, not owls, not foxes. These were layered, almost human, as if multiple voices cried out at once. They drifted from the woods, rising and falling, sometimes cutting off abruptly, leaving silence so sharp it rang in people's ears. Henry heard them too. One night, sitting at his kitchen table with the lamp burning low, He froze when the first scream cut through the air. It wasn't for it was close, maybe at the edge of his yard. His dog whimpered, ears pinned back, tail between its legs. Another scream followed, longer this time, higher pitched, echoing like it came from everywhere at once. Henry gripped his revolver so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't move, didn't breathe, until the sound finally faded into silence. But even then, he couldn't shake the sense that the creature was still watching him, waiting. Children woke from nightmares screaming about glowing eyes at their windows. Parents dismissed them in front of others but checked the glass themselves, staring out into the night, half expecting to see two pink orbs staring back. Fear tightened its grip until the entire community seemed on edge. Ordinary arguments between neighbors turned vicious, stress boiling over. Churches filled with people praying for protection, voices trembling as they begged for safety. Pastors spoke about good and evil, about standing strong in faith, but their own eyes betrayed doubt. The media only made things worse. Reporters hungry for sensational headlines returned, spinning the story into a circus. Some mocked the town, others painted it as a community under alien attack. National newspapers picked it up, turning Enfield into the subject of late-night radio shows. Strangers drove in by the dozens, hoping to spot the monster, snapping photos of fields, woods, even Henry's house. For the people who lived there, it wasn't entertainment, it was survival. As spring nights stretched on, exhaustion set in. People stopped sleeping altogether. Coffee flowed like water. Shadows deepened under eyes, tempers flared, marriages strained. Yet no one dared let their guard down. Because the creature was still out there, prowling unseen, leaving behind just enough evidence to keep the fear alive. One evening, the Simmons family swore they saw it standing in their backyard. All they described was its silhouette short, hunched with something unnatural about its posture. Its eyes burned like fire in the dark. When the father stepped onto the porch with his rifle, it darted away, faster than anything he had ever seen. But when he approached the spot where it had stood, he found something pressed into the soil. 6-toed tracks, deep and fresh. Henry wasn't surprised when he heard about it. He knew the creature wasn't just haunting him anymore. It was haunting all of Enfield. Night after night, the fear grew heavier, until the people of Enfield realized something chilling. The monster didn't need to attack them directly. It didn't need to kill them outright, by stalking, by watching, by leaving its evidence. It was already winning. It was wearing them down, draining them, feeding on their fear. And as the screams grew louder and the sightings more frequent, the question everyone asked remained the same. What does it want? The town of Enfield was no longer the quiet patch of farmland and woods it had once been. By the time whispers of the creature had spread to neighboring counties, Enfield was under a cloud of suspicion, fear, something far more primal survival instinct, word of livestock vanishing, of eerie footprints. Screams carrying across the tree line had left even the most skeptical farmers rattled. Some chalked it up to coyotes, others to hoaxes, but deep down, most people knew. Something unnatural had come to their town. By late April of 1973, Henry McDaniel's story had taken a life of its own. Neighbors who had laughed at him weeks earlier now avoided his porch light and crossed the road when passing his house. They remembered the scratches on his doorframe. Gouges deep and wide enough to suggest claws far stronger than any raccoon or stray dog. They remembered his steady voice when he told reporters, if they do find it, they won't find just one and they won't be from this planet. And when livestock began disappearing, hens vanishing. From locked coops, goats left bloodied in their pens, no one laughed anymore. One Friday evening, a group of men gathered at Enfield's only gas station, their breath clouding in the cool spring air, their voices low and urgent. Sheriff Roy Pochard had been pressured for weeks to do something, but his deputies were stretched thin. Chasing prank calls and frightened residents who swore they had seen glowing eyes in the cornfield, that night the decision was made. A patrol would go out. Not just police, but armed townsfolk, farmers with rifles, mechanics with shotguns, even young men carrying baseball bats and hunting knives. Henry was there, standing in the glow of the gas station light, his face set with grim determination. He had been called crazy enough times. Now the same men who had mocked him were looking to him for guidance. "You don't know what it is," Henry told them, his voice calm but firm. "But it's smart. It comes close to the house, scratches, makes noise, then disappears before you can catch it. Don't underestimate it. The men nodded, some adjusting their caps, others shifting the weight of their weapons. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. They split into two groups, one heading north toward the dense stretch of woods near the railroad tracks, the other toward the open fields where livestock had vanished. Flashlights cut narrow beams through the night, trembling slightly in the hands that held them. Every sound seemed louder out there, the crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig, the distant hoot of an owl. The dogs barked in the distance, uneasy, pulling at their chains as if sensing something moving in the dark. Henry's group trudged along the dirt path by the trees, kept scanning the shadows, his heart pounding harder with every step. He remembered those eyes pink and glowing like burning coals. He remembered the three-legged gait, the grotesque way it had moved, almost hopping, yet fast, disturbingly fast. "Quiet," one man whispered, raising a hand. Everyone froze. From somewhere deeper in the woods came a sound low, guttural, and drawn out. It wasn't the howl of a coyote or the cry of a bobcat. It was something else entirely, something that made the hair stand up on the back of every neck in that search party. They followed the sound, stepping carefully now, guns raised. Then, through the branches, a pair of lights flickered. Not flashlights, not lanterns. Eyes. Two glowing pink orbs hovering in the blackness, staring straight at them. "Jesus Christ," someone muttered, gripping their shotgun tighter. The creature moved. Not away, but sideways, darting between trees with a sickeningly smooth motion. Its three legs struck the ground with an unnatural rhythm, thudding like a drumbeat. Its arms, short and clawed, reached out to brush against the bark, leaving visible scratches. "Hold your fire," Sheriff Poshard hissed. We don't know what it, but the command came too late." A shotgun blast ripped through the night, echoing across the fields. Birds erupted from the trees, wings flapping frantically as the woods came alive with sound. The creature shrieked. Not a roar, not a cry, but a piercing, metallic screech that rattled bones. Then it was gone, vanishing into the underbrush faster than anything human. When they reached the spot, all they found were claw marks deep in the trunk of a tree and footprints in the dirt. The prints were unmistakable, dog-like, but with 6 toes splayed wide. Beside them, a long drag mark, as though a heavy tail had scraped across the earth. Back at the station, the men argued, some insisting they had hit it, others saying it was bulletproof. Sheriff Poshard tried to calm them, but it was useless. Word spread through town that very night. The Enfield Monster had survived gunfire. By morning, more people had joined the frenzy. Men drove pickup trucks through the countryside, shining spotlights across fields and hollering to flush the creature out. Kids huddled under blankets, too afraid to sleep. Women locked every door and window. Though deep down they knew locks would mean nothing against something that could slash through wood and metal, Henry hardly slept. He sat on his porch with a rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the darkness. He swore he heard its scratches on the barn, the shuffle of movement in the tall grass. But each time he went out, there was nothing but silence and the eerie feeling of being watched. A week later, another search was organized. This time, the crowd was bigger, nearly 30 men, some from neighboring towns, drawn by curiosity and the promise of seeing the alien beast for themselves. They combed the woods, fields, and abandoned barns. Dogs were brought in, straining at their leashes, noses low to the ground. The air was tense, every snapping twig making the group whirl with weapons raised. Then came the moment none of them would forget. At the edge of a clearing, one of the hounds froze, ears up, growling low. The men aimed their flashlights. There it was, standing in the open, hunched and grotesque. Its skin was pale, almost gray, stretched tight over a short, squat body. Its legs, 3 of them, supported it with a strange, off-balance stance, yet it looked stable, powerful. The arms hung short at its sides, claws curling in the beam of the light. Those eyes, massive, pink, glowing like molten glass, locked onto the men. The monster didn't charge. It didn't flee. It simply stood there, as if studying them, its head tilting slightly to one side. Then, in an instant, it bounded forward. Men screamed, firing wildly. Bullets ripped into the ground, tearing bark from trees. Flashlights swung violently as the group scattered, some falling, others running blindly into the brush. The creature leapt sideways, impossibly fast, weaving through the chaos. At one point, it brushed past a man, knocking him down with a force like a battering ram. The man swore later that the skin of the creature felt hot like metal left in the sun. And then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, again, vanishing into the woods with a sickening screech that echoed long after the men had regrouped. By now, the town was fractured. Some wanted to continue the hunts, convinced that with enough firepower they could kill the monster. Others begged the sheriff to call in the National Guard or federal authorities. A few whispered that maybe Henry was right, that this thing wasn't from Earth at all. Children were kept home from school. Farmers stopped tending their fields after dark. Strangers began driving through town, reporters and thrill-seekers hoping for a glimpse of the creature. Enfield had become a circus, and the monster seemed to be watching from the shadows, always just out of reach. Henry knew one thing for certain. It was playing with them. Each encounter felt deliberate, calculated as if it enjoyed the chase, the fear it caused. And he knew deep down it wasn't finished yet. The spring of 1973 bled slowly into summer, but in Enfield, Illinois, the season carried no warmth. The cornfields swayed in the wind, the woods buzzed with cicadas, and yet the air held an unnatural tension, as if the very soil remembered the thing that had stalked it. For weeks the hunts had raged, armed, men combing fields, police searching barns, thrill-seekers driving down country lanes hoping to spot glowing eyes in the dark. But the monster remained, always seen, yet never caught, always heard, yet never understood. And for Henry McDaniel, the man who had first seen it, the nightmare wasn't over. Henry hadn't known peace since that first night when claws raked across his screen door. He sat on his porch most evenings, a rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the fields and hedgerows. The air would settle into silence, heavy and expectant, and he would feel that prickle at the back of his neck, the sense of being watched. Some nights he heard the dragging shuffle in the weeds. Other nights, he caught the flash of pink eyes in the distance. He never slept deeply anymore, always waking at the faintest sound, half expecting the thing to be standing at his window. The rest of the town was unraveling too. Families locked themselves inside at dusk. Kids whispered of the monster at school. Farmers spoke of animals mutilated, not just missing. But strangely, no one outside Enfield seemed willing to believe. The newspapers had turned the story into a carnival of ridicule, treating Henry like a fool and painting the whole town as backwards and superstitious. Yet those who lived there, they knew something stalked their nights. It was near midnight when Henry heard it against scratches, faint but deliberate, against the siding of his house. He froze, gripping the rifle tighter, breath catching in his throat. For a moment he told himself it was a raccoon, maybe even a stray dog. But then came the sound that chilled him to the marrow. A low, metallic screech, the same unearthly cry that had echoed in the woods weeks earlier. He stood, heart hammering, and stepped out onto the porch. The night was unnervingly still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. His flashlight beam swept across the yard, cutting through the fog that seemed thicker than usual. And there it was. It's not at a distance this time. Not a fleeting glimpse between trees. The creature stood at the far end of his yard, crouched low to the ground, its 3 legs spread wide. Its arms dangled short and twisted, claws glinting faintly in the beam. And its eyes, massive, glowing pink orbs burned through the fog, fixed squarely on him. Henry raised the rifle. His hand shook, but his aim held steady. He pulled the trigger. The crack split the night, echoing across the fields. The creature didn't flinch. The bullet should have struck dead center, but the thing simply tilted its head, as though curious, as though mocking him. Then, with a grotesque lurch, it began moving forward. It didn't run. It didn't charge. Instead, it hopped forward on its 3 legs in a rhythm that was both slow and disturbingly steady, the thuds vibrating through the ground. With every step, the fog seemed to part around it, as if the air itself recoiled from its presence. Henry fired again and again. The blasts lit up the yard, momentarily revealing the slick, pale texture of the thing's skin. But still, it did not fall. Still, it kept coming. Closer now, Henry could see details he hadn't before. The skin wasn't smooth, it rippled faintly like something alive beneath it. The claws dripped with a dark fluid that hissed faintly as it struck the ground, and the eyes. They weren't just glowing. They pulsed, as if something behind them was alive, something not meant for this world. Henry stumbled back toward the house, fumbling with the door. He could hear it breathing now, a wet, gurgling sound, each exhale rattling like air forced through broken glass. The creature stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. It didn't attack. It didn't retreat. It simply stared, head cocked, as though studying him the way a scientist studies an insect under glass, and then, to Henry's horror, it made a sound. Not a screech, not a growl. A word. At least it sounded like a word. Garbled, distorted, but unmistakably human-like. His name, Hen. Re. The syllables dragged and twisted, mangled by a throat that wasn't built to speak. But the intent was clear. It knew him. Henry froze, every drop of blood in his body turning cold. His mind raced. How could it know his name? Had it been listening, hiding, waiting all these nights? The creature lifted one claw, dragging it slowly across the wooden porch post. The screech of claw on wood set Henry's teeth on edge. Then it leaned closer, those massive eyes reflecting his own pale, terrified face. In that moment, Henry swore he understood something he would never be able to explain. This thing wasn't hunting for food. It wasn't prowling like an animal. It was curious, intelligent. It was toying with him, testing him, maybe even learning from him. And the most horrifying realization of all. This wasn't the first. Henry's words from the newspaper echoed back in his mind. If they do find it, they won't find just one. Before he could move, the creature emitted another garbled sound. Not his name this time, but something guttural, alien. Then, with a sudden jarring motion, it turned and bounded into the fog, vanishing into the fields. Yes. The silence that followed was unbearable. The only evidence of its presence was the deep gouge in his porch post and the lingering, unnatural chill in the air. Henry collapsed into a chair, rifle slipping from his grip. He didn't sleep the rest of the night, nor the nights that followed. He knew it would be pointless, because he finally understood the truth. The Enfield Monster wasn't gone. It wasn't finished. In the days after, Henry stopped talking to reporters. The ridicule had already destroyed his reputation, but that wasn't why he stayed silent. He stayed silent because he knew nothing he could say would prepare anyone for the truth. They didn't want to believe before, and they wouldn't believe now. The sightings slowed but never stopped entirely. Farmers still reported strange tracks in the dirt. Kids swore they saw eyes glowing in the tree line. And at night, when the fog was thick, some families whispered they could hear scratching on their walls, though when they looked, nothing was there. Henry lived the rest of his days with the memory of that night, the eyes, the voice, the way it said his name. And though he never saw it that close again, he always felt it. Watching, waiting. To this day, no explanation has ever been found. The Enfield Monster was never captured, never proven, never understood. The official records list it as nothing more than local hysteria, a string of hoaxes, or the result of overactive imaginations fueled by fear. But Henry McDaniel went to his grave swearing it was real. And sometimes, when the nights are still in Enfield, when the fog rolls heavy over the cornfields and the woods fall silent, locals say you can still hear it, that metallic screech drifting through the darkness, carrying a name on the wind. Henry. Whatever Henry saw that night, it never left Enfield.